If you'd asked me on the morning of September 12th, 2025, what the word home meant to me, I would have pointed straight out the wide back windows of our weathered shingle cottage on the Outer Banks and said, everything you can see from this porch, the dunes rolling like golden waves, the sea oats bending silver in the breeze, the Atlantic stretching all the way to forever. That's home. That's everything. For 36 years, that fragile strip of sand off Nags Head, North Carolina, was the absolute center of my universe. Captain Michael Bennett Mike to the fishermen who respected him. Mikey to the old-timers who'd known him since he was a deckhand, with freckles and a chipped tooth. And simply Daddy to our girls was the man who made that narrow barrier island feel like the safest, most permanent place on earth. We found the house in the spring of 1990, driving down from Norfolk, where Mike was running charters and I was keeping books for a marine supply company. It was listed as a handyman special, which in Outer Banks real estate speak meant it was one good nor'easter away from floating out to sea. The mint green paint had faded to a sickly pea. The pilings were barnacled and leaning, and sand had drifted so high against the north side that you could walk straight onto the second floor deck. But the moment we stepped inside, salt air pouring through broken windows, Mike took my hand and said, "Carolyn Sue, look at that view. Ain't another one like it from here to Cape Point." And he was right. The house sat on a high dune lot, with nothing but sea oats and sky between us and the horizon. We bought it for $178,000 a fortune on his seasonal captain's income and my part-time salary. We scraped together the down payment by selling Mike's old Boston whaler and cashing in my teacher's retirement from the 2 years I'd taught high school math before deciding numbers on paper couldn't compete with numbers on a depth finder. The closing felt like a leap off the end of the pier. We signed the papers in a cinder block office that smelled of mildew and fried shrimp, then drove straight to the house and sat on the splintered deck, drinking beer from a cooler until the stars came out. That first summer, we lived in chaos. We camped in the living room on an air mattress while we gutted the kitchen peeling back layers of linoleum to reveal wide pine floors that had survived decades of sand and storms. Mike worked sunrise to sunset on charters, then came home covered in fish scales to jack up sagging beams. I waited tables at a seafood shack on the bypass to keep cash flowing. Weekends were sacred. We'd rent a sander from the hardware in Manteo and refinish floors until our knees bled, then collapse on the deck with takeout crab cakes and watch the moon rise over the water. We chose the perfect shade of driftwood gray for the shingles bare, weathered barrier, and painted it ourselves from ladders swaying in the wind. Mike rebuilt the pilings after Hurricane Fran in 1996 tried to claim the house. I remember him waist-deep in surf, driving new treated timbers while I held the level and prayed. We added the wraparound porch in stages. First, the ocean side with built-in benches wide enough for napping grandchildren, then the sound side for watching sunsets over Roanoke Island. We screened the lower level for crab boils that drew half the neighborhood, installed ceiling fans that spun lazily against the humidity, and turned the tiny attic room into a true widow's walk with a ship's ladder and a 360-degree view that made you feel like you were standing on the bow of the world. Elle planted sea oats along the dune line to hold the sand. Hundreds of plugs carried home in the bed of Mike's pickup, poked into the ground one by one, while he built the private pier. That pier became legend. 200 feet of pressure-treated lumber jutting straight into the Atlantic with a T at the end wide enough for 4 Adirondack chairs and a cooler. Mike engineered it to withstand nor'easters. I decorated it with rope railings and solar lanterns that glowed soft amber at night. Our daughters learned to fish from its planks first with bamboo poles and shrimp, later with surf rods heavy enough to cast past the breakers. Abigail arrived in the spring of 1992, born at the little hospital in Nag's Head while a gale howled outside. We brought her home to a house still smelling of fresh paint and sawdust, wrapped her in a quilt my mother made from Mike's old work shirts. Hannah followed in 1995, born during a calm August week when the ocean lay flat as glass. The house adjusted to them like it had been waiting. Baby gates at the stairs, a sandbox under the pilings, buckets and shovels lining the porch like colorful buoys. Summers became a rhythm as steady as the tides. Mike ran charters 6 days a week, taking tourists out for dolphin watches or serious anglers chasing drum and tuna, while I turned the lower level into a small rental office for the fleet, keeping books for captains who couldn't balance a checkbook to save their lives. Evenings belonged to us, low country boils with corn and shrimp, bonfires on the beach with guitars and stories, teaching the girls to read the clouds for coming storms. Winters were quieter, just the roar of January surf and the glow of the wood stove, while Mike mended nets and I baked cornbread that steamed up the windows. We paid off the mortgage in the fall of 2018 with the proceeds from Mike's best tuna season ever. 3 bluefin that topped the scales at the Oregon Inlet Way Station. We celebrated with a bonfire bigger than any before, the whole neighborhood turning out with coolers and lawn chairs. Mike pulled me onto the sand, the firelight dancing on his silver-streaked hair, and whispered, "We did it, Carol and Sue. This stretch of sand, this house, this life. It's ours free and clear forever." The girls were there. Abby, newly engaged, Hannah, just back from her first season as mate on a headboat, and we danced barefoot while someone played wagon wheel on a battered guitar. Mike, at 67, was still the strongest man I knew. His shoulders carried decades of hauling lines, his hands were mapped with scars from gaffs and winches, but his smile could still stop my heart across a crowded dock. We talked about the future the way coastal people do, cautiously, always aware of the next storm on the horizon. Maybe lease the boat to a younger captain. Maybe spend whole winters here, instead of just long weekends. Maybe teach the grandchildren, Abby's 2 little ones, to bait a hook the way he'd taught their mother. I noticed the extra time he spent down east in Beaufort for what he called engine overhauls or hull work. I noticed he sometimes came home quieter than usual, staring longer at the horizon. But I trusted the man who'd rebuilt our home plank by plank, who'd held my hand through miscarriages and hurricanes and the slow drift of middle age. I trusted the man whose heartbeat I knew, as well as the sound of the surf. I trusted the salt in his veins, the promise in his eyes when he said, "Forever." I was wrong. The forever we built on that fragile strip of sand was already cracking beneath my feet, worn away by 19 years of tides I never saw coming. While I was planting sea oats and painting shutters and raising our daughters and loving him with every sunrise, Mike had been navigating a second harbor, building a second home with a woman who believed his wedding ring was only memory. But in the golden light of that September morning in 2025, standing on the porch we'd built together, coffee steaming in my hand as I watched his truck disappear down the beach road, I still believed our house was the only one his heart came home to. I still believed the ocean that gave us everything couldn't take it all away. I was wrong about that too. The summer of 2025 had been one of the best we'd had in years. Calm seas, steady charters. Tourists flush with post-pandemic cash and eager for offshore adventures. Mike was running the Carolyn Sue, his 42-foot custom sport fisher, with the flying bridge and twin diesels 6 days a week, coming home with coolers full of mahi, wahoo, even the occasional billfish for the wall photos. He was 67, but moved like a man 10 years younger, barking orders to his mates with the same authority that had made him a legend from Oregon Inlet to Hatteras. I'd tease him about slowing down, but he'd just grin and say, "The ocean don't retire captains, darlin'. It just calls 'em home when it's time." September brought the first hints of fall cooler nights, water temperatures dropping, the tourists thinning out. We'd already started our off-season rituals. Mike servicing the engines himself in the marina slip, me deep cleaning the rental linens and closing up the lower-level guest rooms we sometimes let to fishing buddies. Abby and her family were planning a weekend visit. Her husband Tom had taken leave from his Coast Guard station in Wilmington, and the grandbabies, 4 and 2, were old enough now to chase crabs on the beach without constant supervision. Hannah had promised to drive over from Oregon Inlet with fresh tuna steaks if Mike brought home a good catch. I was looking forward to the house full again. The chaos of little feet on the porch, the smell of sunscreen and baby shampoo mixing with salt air. September 12th dawned perfect, clear skies, light southwest breeze. Seas reported at 2 to 3 feet. Mike was up before the gulls, moving quietly around the kitchen in his stockinged feet, coffee percolating, slicing a banana into his oatmeal, packing his lunch cooler with the turkey sandwich I'd made the night before. He wore his lucky faded red cap, the one with the frayed bill he refused to replace, and his oldest deck shoes soft from years of salt. He bent over the bed where I was still half asleep and kissed my forehead, whiskers scratching familiarly. "Got a full boat today. 6 guys from Charlotte. Want tuna? Should be back by 5, 6 at latest. Mahi for supper, if the dolphin are running." I mumbled something about being careful, the way I always did, and he chuckled low. "Always am, Carolyn Sue. Love you bigger than the ocean." Then he was gone. The soft close of the screen door, the crunch of shells under his truck tires, the red taillights disappearing down the beach road toward the marina. I dozed another hour, then started my Saturday rhythm. Coffee on the porch, watching the sun climb over the dunes, the ocean already sparkling like it had secrets to share. I stripped the beds in the guest rooms, started laundry fluttering on the line. We still line-dried sheets because nothing beats sun and salt. Scent. Swept endless sand from the lower deck, hosed down the outdoor shower where generations of sandy feet had tracked in the beach. By 10, I was in the kitchen prepping potato salad for the weekend, boiling eggs, chopping celery, humming along to an old Beach Boys station on the ancient kitchen radio Mike refused to upgrade. The call came at 11:47 a.m. My phone was on the counter, screen lighting up with USCG Sector NC. My heart did that skip it always did when Mike was offshore, but I answered calmly, years of practice. "Mrs. Carolyn Bennett?" "Yes." "This is Lieutenant Harris, Coast Guard Sector, North Carolina." "Ma'am, there's been an incident involving the vessel Carolyn Sue." The kitchen tilted. I gripped the counter, knuckles white against the Formica we'd installed in 1998. "Mike?" I whispered. "He's unaccounted for, ma'am. A sudden squall line moved through faster than forecast 8 to 10-foot seas in minutes. The EPIRB activated at 11:12. We have a helo and cutters on scene. His 2 deckhands are safe in a life raft, dehydrated, but stable. They reported Captain Bennett got them out, but stayed with the vessel. I don't remember much after that. Hanging up, calling Abby first, she screamed into the phone. A sound I'll hear in nightmares forever. Trying Hannah next straight to voicemail, probably out on the water herself. Neighbors arriving somehow, word travels faster than radio on the banks. Someone drove me to the marina where the Coast Guard had set up a command post. I sat in a plastic chair under the pavilion, staring at the empty slip where the Carolyn Sue should have been tied, while officers in orange flight suits coordinated searches. The deckhands young men Mike had mentored for years were brought in by helicopter around 3. I hugged them both, soaked and shaking in survival blankets, their eyes haunted. He made us go, one kept saying. Told us to grab the raft and jump, said he'd be right behind us, but when we looked back, the boat rolled. They searched until dark, then through the night with flares and floodlights. I stayed at the marina until they gently insisted I go home. Someone would call the moment there was news. A neighbor drove me back. The house felt cavernous and cruel without Mike's boots by the door. Abby arrived at midnight, Hannah at dawn. Both girls collapsing into my arms on the porch like they were children again. We sat up all night on the widow's walk, wrapped in quilts, watching searchlights sweep the horizon. The Coast Guard called at 7:12 a.m. on September 13th, a body recovered 10 miles offshore, still tethered to the wheelhouse by a safety line, as if trying to ride the boat down rather than abandon her. Positive identification by noon, cause blunt force trauma and drowning. The Carolyn Sue herself was found capsized 2 days later, eventually salvaged and sold for parts, the insurance payout barely covering the loans we still carried on the engines. The memorial was everything Mike would have wanted, and nothing any of us could bear. Half the Outer Banks turned out commercial boats flying flags at half-mast, charter fleets shutting down for the day, tourists lining the beach in respectful silence. We held it at sunset on the public beach access just north of our dune, where Mike had taught countless kids to cast. Fishermen wore their oilskins. Women brought casseroles that piled up in our fridge for weeks. Someone played Amazing Grace on a harmonica. Another captain read the Fisherman's Prayer. Abby and Hannah spoke voices breaking about the Father who taught them to bait hooks and read the stars. I couldn't speak at all. We scattered his ashes from the end of our pier at dusk, the sky bleeding orange and purple like one of his favorite sunsets. Dozens of boats formed a flotilla offshore, horns sounding in salute. The girls held me up as I poured the urn into the outgoing tide, whispering the words we'd said to each other every night for 36 years. Love you bigger than the ocean. The weeks that followed were mercifully numb. The fleet took care of practicalities, settling charter deposits, handling condolences from clients who'd fished with Mike for decades. I functioned on autopilot, thanking people for food I couldn't eat, boxing Mike's foul weather gear to donate to young deckhands, sitting on the pier at night, listening for his footsteps that never came. Abby and Hannah stayed as long as they could. Abby's husband holding down their home in Wilmington, Hannah's boss giving bereavement leave. We sorted Mike's tools in the boathouse, cried over old photos, told stories until our throats hurt. They left reluctantly in early October, promising to return soon. The house settled into an aching quiet, just the surf, the gulls, and me, sweeping endless sand from floors that suddenly felt too big. I told myself the worst was over, that losing Mike suddenly was the cruelest blow the ocean could deliver, that grief would come in waves, but the house, our house, would hold me steady the way it always had. Elle believed the storm had passed. I was wrong. The real storm, the one that would capsize everything a thought I knew about my marriage, was already gathering down east in Beaufort, carried on tides I'd never learned to read. October on the Outer Banks is my favorite time tourists gone. Beaches wide and empty, water still warm enough for a quick dip, but the air crisp enough for sweaters at night. The dunes turn golden with maturing sea oats, and the light has that slanted, nostalgic quality that makes everything look like an old postcard. I'd been leaning into the quiet, finding small comforts in routine. Early morning walks along the high tide line, collecting shells for the grandbabies, sweeping the endless sand from the porch each afternoon, burning Mike's favorite cedar candles in the evenings, while I sat on the widow's walk with a glass of wine and watched the stars emerge one by one. Grief had settled into a rhythm sharp stabs when I reached for his coffee mug out of habit. Dull aches when I passed his boots still lined up by the door. Quiet moments of almost peace when the surf sounded just like his breathing beside me. The girls checked in daily. Abby sent photos of the kids building sandcastles for Grandpa Mike. Hannah texted voice notes from the bridge of her charter boat, telling stories of clients who asked about her dad. The fleet had been wonderful. Someone mowed the sea oats path without being asked. Another captain dropped off a cooler of fresh shrimp, because Mike would want you eating good. I was functioning. I was healing, or so Elle told myself. It was a Thursday afternoon, October 23rd, 6 weeks to the day. Since the squall, I'd spent the morning deep cleaning the boathouse, sorting tackle boxes Mike had left half organized, deciding what to keep for the grandkids and what to donate to the Marina's youth program. My hands smelled of salt water and never dull from polishing old reels. I came up to the main deck for a break, broom in hand, sweeping the fine layer of sand that always accumulated overnight. The breeze was offshore, carrying the scent of pine from the maritime forest behind the dune. A silver Honda Odyssey minivan pulled slowly into the shell driveway, unfamiliar with Carteret County plates. I paused mid-sweep, shading my eyes. A woman stepped out first, mid-40s, maybe 48, with sun-streaked brown hair pulled into a loose ponytail, wearing faded jeans rolled at the cuffs and a navy Beaufort Marina t-shirt that looked soft from hundreds of washings. She moved with the careful balance of someone used to boats, but her face was pale, strained. She opened the sliding door, and a little girl climbed out about 8 years old, barefoot in a pink rash guard and denim shorts, clutching a stuffed dolphin. A teenage boy followed more slowly from the front passenger seat. 16 or 17 lanky, with dark hair that fell over his eyes and the kind of slouch that said the world already weighed too much. The woman hesitated at the bottom of the wooden stairs leading to the porch, one hand on the railing as if steadying herself against a swell. The children hung back by the car. She looked up at me, really looked, and her eyes filled so quickly I thought she might turn and leave. Instead, she climbed the steps slowly, deliberately, until she stood 3 feet away. "Mrs. Bennet?" Her voice was soft, Carolina coastal, with that gentle down-east lilt. It trembled only slightly. "Yes," I said, leaning the broom against the railing. "Can I help you?" She took a breath that seemed to come from her boots. "My name is Teresa Ann Marrow. This might sound crazy, but I knew your husband, Mike." She reached into the canvas tote over her shoulder and pulled out something small that glinted in the sunlight. She held it out, palm up. It was Mike's brass compass, the one his father had given him the day he earned his captain's license in 1981. The glass was scratched from decades in his pocket, the engraving on the back worn but still legible. To Mike, find your way home. Love, Dad. I'd seen it a million times, watched him consult it on foggy mornings, felt its weight when he pressed it into my hand during hurricanes, saying, "Hold this till I'll get back." My knees buckled. I gripped the porch railing, the same railing Mike had replaced after Hurricane Isabel, and somehow stayed upright. Teresa stepped forward as if to catch me, but stopped short. "I'm so sorry to come like this," she said quickly. "I've been trying to find the courage for weeks. There's no good way. May I come in? Just for a few minutes? The kids can wait in the car if—" "No," I heard myself say. "Bring them up. It's hot." My voice sounded far away, like someone else speaking through a conch shell. She turned and waved them forward. The little girl bounded up the stairs first, curious, Dolphin tucked under her arm. The boy followed slowly, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the house. The wide porch, the Adirondack chairs painted nautical blue, the wind chimes made from Mike's old fishing lures. When he finally looked at me, something in my chest cracked wide open. He had Mike's eyes, Atlantic blue, slightly tilted at the outer corners, framed by the same thick, dark lashes. The girl Emma, Teresa called her, had his exact lopsided grin when she smiled shyly and said, "Your house is pretty. It smells like the beach." We went inside. I led them to the great room with its vaulted ceiling and wall of windows facing the ocean. The room where we'd hosted Christmas mornings, Super Bowl parties, wedding rehearsal dinners for both girls. Sunlight poured across the wide pine floors, illuminating dust motes dancing like tiny plankton. I gestured to the long sectional couch facing the view. Teresa and Emma sat on one end. The boy Caleb chose the single armchair farthest away, perching on the edge like he might bolt. Elle took the ottoman across from them, hands clasped tight in my lap to hide the shaking. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sounds were the rhythmic crash of waves and the soft creak of the house settling in the breeze. Teresa reached into her tote again and pulled out a small velvet pouch. From it, she drew more items, slowly, reverently, and laid them on the driftwood coffee table between us. A child's drawing of a boat labeled "Daddy's Carolyn Sue" in purple crayon, a faded photo of Mike holding a newborn wrapped in a hospital blanket, another of him teaching a young boy to cast from a shorter pier, a final one of Mike pushing a little girl on a swing, both laughing in sunlight. The newborn was Caleb. The little girl was Emma. Teresa's voice was barely above a whisper when she finally spoke. Mike and I met in the fall of 2006. He'd brought the boat to Beaufort for a major haul-out new shafts, cutlass bearings, the works. My husband Randy had died the year before in a trawler sinking off Lookout. I was working the office at the marina, trying to keep things together for Caleb. He was just 2. Mike was kind. Fixed things around the cottage without being asked. Took Caleb fishing on the Sound to give me a break. One night, after a long day in the yard, we shared a beer on my dock and talked. Really talked. About losing people to the sea. About loneliness. She paused, eyes on the photos. It grew slowly. He told me his first wife had passed years earlier, cancer, he said. That he had 2 grown daughters, but visited only occasionally. I believed him because I wanted to. Because he was good to us. He bought the little trawler cottage down the street from the marina in 2009. Cash from a big tuna season. He said we fixed it up together the way you fix things when you're building a life. Emma tugged Teresa's sleeve. "When is Captain Daddy coming home? You said we were visiting his beach house." Teresa's face crumpled for the first time. She pulled Emma onto her lap, stroking her hair. Remember, sweet girl, Daddy went to heaven when his boat got hurt. This is his other house. This is Mrs. Carolyn's house. Emma turned to me with solemn eyes. Mike's eyes in miniature, and offered a small wave. Hi, Daddy said you have the best shells. I waved back automatically, my hand moving without permission. Caleb finally spoke, voice cracking with adolescence and grief. He talked about you all the time. Said you planted all the sea oats yourself. Said this pier was the longest one on the banks because you wanted to fish past the breakers. Ull looked at him. At this boy who carried Mike's bone structure, the same slope of shoulders, the same way of holding his mouth when he was trying not to cry, and felt the floor drop away beneath me. Teresa reached into the tote one last time and pulled out a manila envelope thick with papers. She laid it on the table like it weighed 100 pounds. There's more. Things he changed, legally. The insurance. Part of the pier and boathouse. He wanted the kids to have a connection to the water, to his life. He thought he could keep both worlds safe. I didn't open it yet. I couldn't. I just stared at the little girl on her lap, at the boy who looked so much like Mike at 16 it hurt to breathe, and felt 36 years of certainty dissolve like sea foam. Teresa stood eventually, gathering Emma. Caleb rose too, still not meeting my eyes. At the door she paused, hand on the knob. I didn't know Mrs. Bennet. Not until the news reached Beaufort. I thought I was his only wife left. I'm so sorry. I nodded, unable to form words. I watched them walk down the shell path through the sea oats I'd planted one by one, get into the minivan with Carteret plates, and drive away. Then I closed the door, slid down the wall in the entryway, the same wall where Mike had hung our wedding photo 36 years ago, and cried until my throat was raw and the sun set blood red over the ocean. Not just for the husband I'd lost to the sea, but for the marriage I'd lost to secrets deeper than any trench offshore. The compass sat on the coffee table where Teresa had left it, pointing true north as always. But nothing in my world felt true anymore. After Teresa, Caleb, and Emma drove away that October afternoon, the house felt like a boat taking on water, familiar yet suddenly foreign, every creak and shadow carrying new weight. The compass sat on the driftwood coffee table where Teresa had left it, catching the late sunlight like an accusation. The child's crayon drawing of the Carolyn Sioux lay beside it, purple scribbles for waves, a stick figure captain waving from the bridge. Emma's stuffed dolphin had left a single strand of pink thread on the couch cushion. The manila envelope waited unopened, thick and ominous. I didn't touch it at first. I couldn't. I walked out to the pier instead, the pier Mike and I had built, plank by plank over 3 summers, arguing over measurements and laughing when the tide soaked our shoes. I stood at the end where we'd scattered his ashes, wind whipping my hair, and stared at the horizon until my eyes burned. The ocean gave nothing back, no answers, no comfort, just the same endless role it had offered for 36 years. I whispered questions into the wind. How long? Why? Did you love her more? Did you love us less? The waves kept their ancient silence. Eventually the sun dipped low, painting the sky the same blood orange it had the night we paid off the mortgage. I went back inside, legs heavy as if walking through surf. I made a pot of coffee I didn't drink, then finally sat at the kitchen table, the wide pine table we'd salvaged from a demolished fisherman's shack in the 90s, scarred with knife marks from filleting countless fish and initials carved by the girls when they were small. I opened the envelope. The documents were meticulously organized, photocopies with post-it notes in Teresa's careful handwriting, guiding me through them like a tour of my own destruction. First, a revised will drafted in 2023 by an attorney in Morehead City, leaving Teresa and the children undivided joint interest in the private pier, boathouse, and associated water rights of our property, described as maritime heritage assets for minor children, Caleb Michael Marrow and Emma Grace Marrow. Mike's signature was unmistakable, bold, looping M-tight T's like mast lines. A codicil noted to ensure their continued connection to the sea and the legacy of Captain Michael Bennett. Second, beneficiary change forms for a $300,000 term life policy taken out in 2010 through the Commercial Fishermen's Association primary beneficiaries Caleb and Emma, with Teresa as trustee. My name had been primary until a change dated February 2024. A sticky note from Teresa. He did this after a health scare, said he wanted them secure if anything happened. Third, bank records from an account opened in 2008 at a credit union in Beaufort solely in Mike's name. Monthly transfers from our joint account, small at first, $300 to $500 labeled gear or fuel, growing to $1,500 to $2,000 during good seasons. Total over 19 years, $223,714.18. Line items for a mortgage on the trawler cottage, paid off in 2021, private school tuition for Caleb at a small Beaufort academy, orthodontist bills, summer camps on Ocracoke, a family beach vacation to the Florida Keys in 2018 that Mike had told me was a solo maintenance trip. There were spreadsheets too. Mike's neat columns tracking every dollar. One sheet labeled Home for Our Expenses, Mortgage, until 2018, Property Taxes, Pier Repairs after storms, College funds for Abby and Hannah, another labeled Down East, House payments, kids' clothes, dance lessons for Emma, a new outboard for Teresa's skiff. Balanced almost to the penny, as if fairness could be measured in ledger lines. Elle felt the coffee rise in my throat. I pushed back from the table and made it to the half baths just in time, retching until my ribs ached. When it passed, I rinsed my face, staring at a woman in the mirror I barely recognized, eyes swollen, skin gray against the tan I'd earned all summer. Then I did what any widow whose world has just capsized would do. I searched. Mike's old laptop was still in the boathouse office, the one he used for weather reports, charter bookings, and emailing clients. The password hadn't changed. Carolyn Sue, 1989. Our wedding year. The irony tasted metallic. The desktop was familiar folders for charters, maintenance, weather logs. But buried 4 levels deep inside maintenance was a folder named simply BFT. Beaufort, I realized later. Inside, subfolders, photos, docs, letters. Photos held thousands of images I'd never seen. Caleb's birth in 2008. Mike in scrubs holding a newborn with the same dark hair he'd had at that age. Emma's first birthday on a different porch, cake smeared across her cheeks while Mike laughed behind the camera. Christmases with a smaller tree decorated in nautical ornaments. Caleb's first fish-shaped proud puppy drum held aloft on a pier, half the length of ours. Family vacations. Cape Lookout Lighthouse, Shackleford ponies. A Disney trip where Mike wore mouse ears with the same grin he'd worn on our honeymoon. Docs mirrored the papers Teresa had brought scans of the will, insurance forms, property deeds for the Beaufort cottage titled solely in Mike's name until transferred to Teresa in 2022. Letters was the cruelest. Draft emails, some sent, some not. To Teresa, love notes about missing her on long trips, plans for weekends, apologies for missed school events. One from 2015. I hate lying to Carolyn. She's the best woman I know. But leaving would destroy her and the girls. I'm trapped by my own cowardice. Teresa's reply. Then stop promising forever and just give us the time you can. Another from early 2024 after the insurance change. It's done. The kids will be taken care of. Carolyn has the house and my pension she'll never want. I can't break her heart more than Elle already have in secret. A draft never sent, dated a week before the fatal charter. If the chest pain gets worse, tell Carolyn gently. Tell her the pier is hers. Truly. Burn the rest. I called Abby first. She answered on the second ring, children's laughter in the background that cut off when she heard my voice. Mom, what's wrong? Drive here. Now. Bring Tom if you can. Tell Hannah to come too. I couldn't say more without breaking. Abby arrived at midnight, headlights sweeping the dunes as she pulled in too fast, shells flying. She burst through the door and folded me into her arms on the porch like I was the child. I showed her everything. The compass, the photos, the spreadsheets. She cried silently at first, tears dripping onto the insurance forms, then raged, pacing the deck, cursing her father in whispers so the neighbors wouldn't hear. Hannah arrived at dawn, still in her charter clothes, smelling of bait and diesel. She went straight to the laptop, scrolling through photos with a captain's stoic face until she reached one of Mike teaching Caleb to tie a bimini twist, the same knot he'd taught her at age 10. Then she cracked, sobbing into my shoulder, like the day she'd lost her first tooth. We sat at the kitchen table until the sun was high, reading every email aloud, voices raw. We found more in Mike's cloud backup scanned birthday cards to Caleb and Emma he'd never mailed from home. Father's Day messages from them calling him Captain Daddy. Videos of Emma's dance recitals he'd watched alone in hotel rooms. The girl's grief twisted into something sharper. Abby kept repeating, how could he look us in the eye every holiday? Hannah focused on the money. He skimmed from our college funds, from your retirement, for their Disney trips and private school. We hired an attorney the next week, Manteo's best estate litigator, recommended by a fleet friend who'd been through a messy captain's widow dispute. Karen Whitaker spread the documents across the same kitchen table and mapped the battlefield. North Carolina's marital property laws and elective share rights could likely invalidate much of the will and peer transfer if we proved the funds were joint marital assets. But Teresa could claim equitable distribution or argue Mike's intent. Discovery would mean depositions, financial forensics, possibly putting Caleb and Emma on the stand. Some nights I walked the pier alone, compass in my pocket, feeling its weight like an anchor. I raged at Mike, at the sea that took him before I could confront him, at myself for missing every sign. Other nights, Elle just sat on the bench at the end, watching phosphorescence in the waves, wondering how many nights he'd done the same on a different pier an hour south. Teresa wrote once more, a letter postmarked Beaufort, no return address. Mrs. Bennett Carolyn, I replay our meeting every night and wish I'd handled it differently. Mike spoke of you with such love, your strength, your laugh, the way you planted sea oats one by one. He said you were his true north. What we had was real to me, but I see now it was built on his grief and guilt. He changed the papers last year after chest pain sent him to the ER. Thought he might not have long. He wanted the kids secure without taking your home. I won't fight you for the house or most of the pier. It's yours. You earned every shingle. But please consider letting the children keep some connection to the water he loved. They've lost him too. With sorrow, Teresa, I read it on the widow's walk at sunset, gulls wheeling below. Part of me wanted to tear it to pieces and scatter it on the wind. Part of me ached for the boy who looked like Mike and the little girl who drew boats in purple crayon. We forwarded it to Karen without reply. The legal wake dragged through fall and winter motions, counter motions, depositions scheduled and delayed. I kept the house running on autopilot, renting the lower level to winter surfers for income, maintaining the pier against erosion, planting new sea oats when the old ones blew out in nor'easters. And every evening I returned to the table scarred with decades of our life, staring at the compass pointing north, wondering how a man who could always find his way home at sea lost his way so completely on land. The paper wake stretched on, slow and inexorable as an outgoing tide, carrying away pieces of the marriage I thought I'd had, leaving me to salvage what remained on a shore Elle no longer fully recognized.